Well, welcome to Graceway Baptist Church in our Sunday School hour, and this is for November 30th of 2025. And I'll just say, I hope you have enjoyed this holiday season and you enjoyed our Thanksgiving dinner as a church. And Luke Johnson, hope you enjoyed Thanksgiving with your family as well, and hope that you are ready for a wonderful time as we celebrate the incarnation of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's not just that a baby was born, that happens all the time, but God put on flesh. That's what incarnation means. And he lived among us, dwelt among us. We beheld his glory, as it says in John chapter 1. And he did it all perfectly, sinlessly, according to the will of the Father, so that he could go to the cross as our spotless, sinless lamb, our sacrifice, bear the wrath of God for us, be raised from the dead, and later be ascended to the right hand of God the Father, where he draws us to himself, and where everything we have that secures us with God the Father is all pointing back to Jesus. It's all because of what the Son, S-O-N, has done for us. And that's what we really celebrate as Christmas. So Merry Christmas to you, and may the Lord bless you. And we all have a lot to be thankful for. Now we are looking at a song. They don't write songs like this anymore. We couldn't sing them anyway. But this is a song of praise and a song of history. We're going to learn as we go through this, because in this particular part of Judges, it's chapter 5. We're going to look at the first 9 verses, and they're going to be singing about their victory. And this is one of the ways ancient peoples would extend their culture, I guess. And they would remember their history, because they would make up songs and they would sing the songs, and then they would teach the songs to their children. And then their children would teach it to their children, and so forth and so on. Well, we get to join them on all of this. Now, this reminds me a lot of after the Israelites marched across the Red Sea, and the Egyptians, were drowned in all of that. And that's when Miriam takes a timbrel and they begin to sing and dance. And they say, I will sing unto the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously, the horse and his rider thrown into the sea. And the Lord my God, my strength, my song has now become my victory. Remember all of that? Very, very, very reminiscent of that time, because that's how they would one of the ways they would preserve their history and their triumphs and their glories, and teach it to the next generation. Now, as I was reading this, I thought, we don't celebrate enough. We should celebrate more. We should celebrate our victories more. What about victories that you've had in maybe over a sin that's dominated your life and now you're free from it? You should celebrate that. How many times have you had an answered prayer? And instead of just acting like, well, God was kind of obligated to do it, that's what he should have done, I'm such a nice guy. Maybe we should celebrate and be grateful for it and do it like they did. And the other thing that I thought of too is, if you're like me and in my family, I know very little of my family history. I know some, and I found out more as time has gone by, but I don't know a lot. I think about my own dad, 2 Purple Hearts, all kinds of medals and things like that. And yet I don't know any of those stories about how that happened. And he didn't talk about it much. And I kind of would like to have known, because I'd like to pass that on to my children and to my grandchildren. That's just the way we're kind of designed. It's in our DNA to pass those things on. Even so many times in the Old Testament, long after Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, how does God identify himself? I am the God of your fathers, meaning ancestors, not literal fathers, your ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Isn't that interesting? And they knew their genealogies, and they knew about the family history. And we don't. We don't know a whole lot about that type of thing. So share your story. And I've encouraged you before in some other Sunday school lessons, write down your testimony, and maybe record it and have it digitally so they can see your voice, see you and hear your voice I think that's a good thing to do. At least have it written out somewhere so that your descendants, maybe your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren, one day they might read it. And the Lord might use that in a powerful way in their life. But you can't really celebrate what you don't know and what you don't understand. So we're going to be looking at chapter 5 of the book of Judges, verses 1 through 9. And it says here, after King Jabin and Sisera were defeated, Israel celebrated. As they did after crossing the Red Sea, they sang. And this song also gives us more information about the extremely unlikely victory of the nation of Israel. So we're going to get more insight than what was recorded previously for us. So, you ready? Let's turn in our Bibles to Judges 5 and look together at verses 1 through 9. And it says, Then Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, sang on that day, saying, When leaders lead in Israel, when the people willingly offer themselves, bless the Lord. Why'd they say it like that? Because that's evidently unusual. And that's something you ought to praise God for. Leaders are actually leading, and the people of God are willingly offering themselves. Because the two things kind of have to come together if you're going to be a victorious army and have a victorious military campaign. Somebody's got to plan it, and somebody's got to lead out in it. But I was at a conference one time where someone said, if you think you're leading and nobody's following, you're just taking a walk. Isn't that right? Well, that's what they're talking about here. The two things came together. The leaders did what they were supposed to do, and the people were willing. And boy, when you put that, that's when it is an unbeatable combination. That's when something really happens. And why does that happen? And it says in the end of verse 2, bless the Lord. Why? Because that doesn't happen unless God is up to something and doing something. Verse 3, Hear, O kings, and give ear, O princes, the people that used to dominate Israel. Even I, will sing to the Lord. I will sing praise to the God of Israel. Lord, when you went out from Seir, and when you marched from the field of Edom, Edom and Seir, those are places where the descendants of Esau, remember him? The enemies of Jacob, that's where they lived. And the earth trembled, and the heavens poured, and the clouds also poured water. The mountains, verse 5, the mountains gushed before the Lord, this Sinai before the Lord God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, that guy we don't really know much about, the son of Anath, in the days of Jael, we know a lot about her, the highways were deserted, and the travelers walked along the byways. Village life ceased. It ceased in Israel until I, Deborah, arose a mother in Israel. That's the highest honor you could have, by the way, being a mother in Israel. Verse 8, they chose new gods, and then there was war in the gates. Not a shield or a spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. Why? They'd been disarmed, right? That's how you control them. Make sure they don't have any weapons. Verse 9, my heart is with the rulers of Israel, who offered themselves willingly or freely or voluntarily with the people. Bless the Lord. And we'll stop there, okay? So she burst out into song, and we find some things we didn't know before. Why did Sisera, for example, why did he abandon his chariot? You typically wouldn't do that. A chariot being pulled by a horse is going to be much faster than any human pursuer on foot. But then we find as we read this, God sent things in the weather, rainstorms, the mountains gushing with waters. Now, when we were in Israel, we saw that. We were in the desert, and there was a mountain range over to the side of us, And as you looked at those mountains, you could look and you could see where there were big gullies carved out of it, and you could see where it was washed out. And our guide told us that at certain times of the year, that when the rains came on Jerusalem and other places like that, the water had no place to go, and it would just come down in a torrent over those mountains, and it would wash out the roads and everything there, and people would drown. In fact, I looked up on YouTube, and I looked at the waters that were gushing in the flood stage, and they were coming down like a wall and like waterfalls on those mountains that were just bone dry when we were there. So this is what Deborah is describing. So what did that do? It caused defeat for Sisera. It was something that he didn't count on. So let's break it down like this. Point number one, before I get too far ahead of myself, the prescription for victory. The prescription for victory. Then Deborah and Barak, the son of Binoam, sang on that day, saying, when leaders lead, we've already made reference to this, when leaders lead in Israel, when the people willingly offer themselves, bless the Lord. Now that's when something is going to happen. That's when you're going to have great and wonderful things take place. Leaders are leading and the people are following. That's true in the church. That's true anywhere you go. That's true in the family. If nobody's leading the family, where are they going to go? And if the people leading the family are leading, but nobody's following, what's going to happen? You need it all together in harmony. Same thing is true with the government. Same thing is true with the military. And the same thing is true with a corporation. You have to have the leaders giving leadership, and the people have to follow. They can't be out of sync. Now, the leaders were using their influence to stoke the fires of independence for Israel. The leaders are going to lead. Now, you remember in previous verses, Deborah is the one who, as God is working behind the scenes, Deborah is the one that says to Barak, come on, get up. This is the day. This is the day. Stoking the fires. Kind of like if you look at history in the American Revolution. Do you know who stoked the fires of liberty more than anyone else? Oh, it was the Founding Fathers. It was the Continental Congress and all of that. Well, there was some of that, but did you know it was mainly from the pulpits of the churches of the 13 original colonies? But they were stoking the fires of liberty, and other people began to join in. Well, that's what's happening here. This was something that came from God through Deborah, the prophetess. She didn't say, well, I can't get involved in politics and I can't get involved in any of those things. I'm just going to sit here and just judge Israel and leave all the rest of it alone. No, she's the one that stirred him up. Come on, it's time to get up. This is the day that God has delivered this wicked king into our hands, answered our prayers for freedom and our groanings for liberation in all of this. So when the leaders lead, and then notice that the people believed and willingly volunteered themselves. Psalm 110, verse 3. Thy people shall be willing, the King James Version says, in the day of thy power. Well, that's what happened here. Not only did the leaders have a vision, not only did the leaders have a word from God, but the people believed them. The people got involved in it. They jumped in. And so Barak didn't go after Sisera by himself. He took an army with him, right? And that's how God worked on this. The people willingly volunteered themselves. You know, there's nothing more discouraging as a leader than when you talk to people and they turn you down. They don't want to be involved. They don't want to stick their neck out. They don't want it to be anything that they have to do for themselves. They want to sit back and watch other people do it. And they'll give you plenty of praise if you're able to pull it off, but they just don't want to really do much about it. When I was at First Baptist Tuttle, we had a high attendance day, and I had a man in our church. He was a businessman in Oklahoma City and ran a company. And I said to him, I said, his name was Alan. I said, Alan, I'd like for you to be in charge of all of our greeters and our people. And we had a plan as to what we were going to do. And he said, okay, yeah, I can do that. And it worked great. Everybody loved it. He had people out on the parking lot. He had people greeting people at their cars and helping single women out with their kids and, different things like that. You get the idea. And bringing people in, showing them where to go. And we had a great, great day and a lot of people that came that day. And after that was over, I called him up and I said, Alan, man, that worked so well. I said, let's keep doing that. You willing? And he goes, nah, I don't really want to work that hard every week. And he said, and besides, I don't come to church because somebody greets me or shakes my hand. And I said, yeah, but you're not everybody. Some people need that, and that helps them. You could be a blessing to them, and you could change their attitude about the whole thing as they're coming in. And he goes, nah, I don't think I really want to do that. Thanks for the opportunity. And so he turned me down. Okay. Well, that's what is happening so many times in Israel. I wonder if there were other times when somebody maybe said, you know what, guys, we can get together and we could defeat this king and we could be free. But it wasn't God's timing. He's the one who's in control. And I've got a feeling, too, the people really weren't willing to stick their necks out. This could be way too costly. When the signers of the Declaration of Independence, which the King George III would have considered treason, they were thinking about their situation, and they said, this could be really dangerous. We could lose everything. After all, they pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. And for some of them, it cost them all of that. And they were talking about that, and Benjamin Franklin, he always had a way of putting things, and he said, we must hang together, because if we don't hang together, we will doubtless hang separately. So you know what he was saying? We got to be realistic about this, guys. We've got to be together on all of this, committed to this with everything we've got, because the vast majority of the colonies were not for a revolution, only a small percentage. But that small percentage fought, and they believed, and they worked together, and they willingly volunteered themselves for that. And that's why we are an independent and prosperous country today. Well, this is what we see here in Israel, and this is what they sing about. It's nothing new. It's nothing unusual. When leaders lead and the people willingly follow, then bless the Lord. That's unusual. That's not something that normally happens. And so they're willing to fight, but even more than that, like our founders, they were willing to die. And this is a huge change from passive, compliant, submissive Israel. And I don't mean submissive in a good way. I mean when Israel was, they cowed down before their enemies. Okay? They were submissive to the wrong people, not submissive to God, but submissive to their conquerors, right? And so this, what is happening here and what Barak and Deborah are singing about, this is a stirring from God. He's the one that put it in their hearts. He's the one that caused them to believe. He's the one that caused them to follow and to fight. And that's why they are singing in this situation. Okay? Does that make sense? Point number two. The power of earthly rulers compared to God, to the power of God, is what we're going to see next. Now it says, hear, O kings, Gentile kings, give ear, O princes, Gentile princes, right? I, even I, will sing to whom? Not to you, but to the Lord. And I will sing praises to the Lord God of Israel. Then it goes into verse 4. Lord, when you went out from Seir, when you marched from the field of Edom, Gentile territory, the earth trembled and the heavens poured. What king can do that? Could Jabin do that? No. Could Eglon have done that? No. Come on. None of our presidents, not Washington, not Lincoln, not Donald Trump, not Reagan, not any of those could do that. And that's what the point is here. Our God did something that kings cannot do because he outranks and overpowers all of the kings that are ruling and reigning at that particular time. And he says she says, the clouds also poured water. And that's part of what happened here that caused Sisera's chariot, his iron chariot that he was so proud of, to bog down. And it slowed all of the chariots down so that Israel, who normally wouldn't even be able to catch them, was able to do so. Why? Because nature cooperated. Who's in control of nature? Well, it's not Mother Nature. That's kind of offensive and blasphemous when you think about it. It's Father God, the creator of the heavens and the earth, as we find in the first book of the Bible, the book of Genesis, and he's the one that controls the weather. And so during this battle, in this dry place where the iron chariots would be quite an advantage, all of a sudden they've got water everywhere. And with the water comes mud. And they begin to bog down in the mud, and the horses can't pull the chariots. And if they do, they don't pull them very fast. And that's why Sisera abandoned ship. That's why he got out. He could run faster than his chariot could go at that time, making him extremely vulnerable to the Israelite armies. So see what's happening? So all you kings, you need to listen up, because the rain didn't come just by random chance. It came because our God, in answer to prayer, and because of his plan to liberate his people, he brings all of this water and all of this rain to a desert. That's what's amazing, and that's why they're singing about it. This was unusual. This is not something that normally happened. So the mountains gushed before the Lord, and this Sinai before the Lord, the God of Israel. Amazing thing. So an earthly king may control territory, resources, and people, but they cannot, however, do what God did for Israel. God keeps his covenant. Edom was where the descendants of Esau settled, and that normally would be enemy territory, right? But God alone controls nature. There's rain coming in the desert. That's weird. And God alone can shake the earth, just as he did at Mount Sinai. Do you remember when Moses is up on the mountain getting the law of God summarized in the Ten Commandments? The thunder and the lightning, and the people are fearful. And they weren't even allowed to come to the mountain, not even to touch the base of the mountain. So their answer was to make golden calves. God's answer was to reveal himself even more powerfully and more in a more strong way than he actually did. And that's the point that they're making in this psalm, in this song in Judges chapter 5. Now, point number 3. The plummet of a sinful society. What happens? Well, in verse 6 it says, in the days of Shamgar, the son of Anath, in the days of Jael, what happened? Now this is before they win the battle. This is looking back on the way conditions were that necessitated Israel being liberated. What happened? Highways are deserted. The travelers walked along the byways. They'd never settled down. They never stopped. They went on past all of these cities and towns. And verse 7 says, villages ceased. It ceased in Israel. So there were ghost towns, and people were walking around the abandoned cities and going on to someplace else. The Gentile cities were much more appealing, much more attractive to all of that. Why should we stop here? And village life ceased. No more children being born. No more babies. There was no more planting of wheat. No more cattle in the fields. No more industry. Nothing like that at all. The houses are abandoned and they are dilapidated. And that's exactly the way the Canaanites wanted it. We don't want the Israelis here, and we're going to control whatever we can, and we hope that whenever we don't control them anymore, they'll just leave and go somewhere else. We don't want to mess with them. This is the picture of defeat, of desolation, of emptiness, of helplessness, and of, above all, hopelessness in this situation. No hope of anything ever changing. And we find that Jabin controlled everything in Israel. And so life as they knew it had changed, and that's what he wanted. He wanted to control them. He wanted them to be dominated. He wanted them to be defeated. He wanted them to be absolutely hopeless. You see, you get the picture? The thief comes but to kill. Well, that's pretty hopeless, isn't it? Kill, steal, and destroy. So you're left without any resources. You're left without any kind of hope at all. And Jesus said, but I've come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. Well, think about this. God is getting ready to restore a form of abundant life to Israel, isn't he? But before that happens, things have to get very, very desperate. You know, most of the time, people don't move, people don't change unless they're forced to. And most of the time, what it means that they are forced to, it means that there's no other option but to change. Well, that's the way Israel is. All those times before, things are good, we're free, we're prosperous, so let's go bow down before an idol. How much sense does that make? That's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard of in my life. And because they would bow down to the idols, and oh yeah, of course they're still worshiping God, but you know, it's kind of like somebody comes home and they say to their wife, you know, I've got a mistress, I'm having an affair, and I love her, but you know, I love you a little bit more. I mean, that's not going to go over well. And this is the way Israel was treating God, committing spiritual adultery. And it's not that we don't love you, God. You know, you're just no fun anymore. That type of thing. And so life as they knew it was changed. And so about 20 years, Israel quietly just kind of rolled over and they were submissive to the Canaanites. Okay, again, I don't mean to be redundant, but I'm going to remind you that Israel had been brought into the land of Canaan, not to submit to the Canaanites. That's a new one. They were not there to submit to them. They were there to dominate them and to drive them out of the land flowing with milk and honey that God had given to them, right? Well, exactly the opposite is taking place here. And in this, I find a tremendous picture of how often it is that we as the people of God should be walking by faith and not by sight. We should be walking in victory. We should be walking in the glory of God, and yet we don't. And we settle for fruitless, empty villages, and just like is described here. That's a sad thing for what Israel was made to be and was supposed to be, but they kept turning away from the Lord, and as a result, they just kind of, have you ever walked up to a dog that you don't know? And sometimes you see the dog and they show their teeth and they growl and they try to intimidate you. But then there are those other dogs that as soon as you look at them, they have submissive urination and they turn over on their back and they show their belly to say, I'm no threat to you. Don't hurt me. You know, that's Israel. Belly up right before the enemies that they should have been conquering. And we find here described that commerce, population, culture, all of that, they were changed. And that was used by Jabin and Sisera as a means of demoralizing. Look how we dominate you. Look at our power. Look what we were able to do to you. Nothing is the same, and you've just got to deal with it. Okay? You can't do anything about it. You've just got to deal with it. So it's demeaning and demoralizing. It's also going to cause separation, and it's going to enable them to control Israel. So get the idea? So it's not like Deborah and Barak had ideal conditions, and that when everything got right, then boom, here we go. I heard somebody preach years ago out of Acts chapter 2 on the day of Pentecost. And what they did is they were preaching about revival, and they used what happened on Pentecost, and they said, this is what has to happen before we see revival. Gathered together, praying in one accord, all of that type of stuff. They had like 10 things listed. And I remember sitting there on the pew going, good night, man. If my church had all 10 of those things, we wouldn't need revival. We would be revived. And the same thing is true here. If everything had been really great and wonderful for Israel at that time, then they wouldn't need this battle. But everything stunk and everything was empty and barren. And that's going to make it harder to win the victory, but that's also the time when people would be the most motivated. They didn't have anything to lose. Read those verses again. They had lost everything. Israel is desolate. And number 4, let's think about the problems now that overwhelm them. Okay? And what happens here, we find in the last part of verse 7, until I, Deborah, arose a mother in Israel. Now, that's kind of unexpected. That's not who we would look for in this. And it says they chose other gods in contrast to Deborah, but Deborah was walking by faith. And there was war in the gates, arguments among the authorities there. Now, what was going on? Not a shield or spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. They were disarmed. How were they going to get an army together? How were they going to fight? They didn't even know how to use a sword, and they didn't even have a sword that they were going to use. But the Bible goes on to say that my heart is with the rulers of Israel who offered themselves willingly with the people. Bless the Lord. So there's always going to be a mixed multitude. We're never going to be in perfect unity because not everybody is going to walk with God. And that's what's happening here. Some people are choosing new gods. We're going to try somebody else, and we're going to try something else. But the leaders rose up at that particular time and said, we are going to follow and worship the Lord. In Deuteronomy 32:16-18, it says, they made him jealous, meaning God, with strange gods, weird gods. With abominations, they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons who were not God, to gods whom they have not known, new gods, isn't that what it says in Judges 5? New gods who came lately, whom your fathers did not dread. Okay? You neglected the rock who begot you and forgot the God who gave you birth. You know, you kind of forget where you come from, kind of forget what God has done. And you think you need something new. You think you need to try something different. You think that that is a God for the old generation. There used to be a commercial that said, this is not your father's Oldsmobile. Well, that's what Israel was doing. This is not your father's Israel. This is not your father's religion. We're going to do whatever we want to do. And so it became a time of defeat and disgrace for Israel. And it should have been something more powerful than that. And it should have been a time for disarmament. Or it was a time of disarmament, pardon me. And it took away all of their ability to do anything. They were helpless and they were hopeless in all of this. And so when we think about all of this, we see that God used all of these things, even the negative, to stir up this desire for independence. And that's why, as we reread verse 9, my heart is with the rulers of Israel who offered themselves willingly. Somebody's got to do it. And God raised up some people. And I think about Isaiah chapter 6, where Isaiah sees the Lord. And then at the end of it, the Lord said, whom shall we send and who will go for us? Isaiah stepped up and he said, here am I, send me. And that's what was happening here in the book of Judges, more than one person. And so Israel's prospects for victory were slim in all of this. And their training and their resources were low. However, there was a liberty movement arising, and this caused Deborah to burst out in praise. So let's do a conclusion here and say, as in the American Revolution, no one would have given Israel much of a chance, just like America was not given much of a chance to defeat Great Britain. The undeserving Israelites were blessed by a gracious God who, against all odds, brought them to victory. Boy, emphasize that. Against all odds. This should never never have come about. This should never have worked. But there again, we say the two words, but God. And that's true in our lives as well. You're going to have a lot of things that are not supposed to work. Why are you giving money to the church every week? You've got other things you could do with that money. But then when you look back on it one of these days, you're going to find out you were blessed because of what you did and what you gave, not because of what you kept. There are going to be times when you take a step of faith in confronting somebody in sin, and everybody says, you're going to die lonely, and you're going to be miserable, and you're never going to have any friends. And then that person repents, and now you've gained a brother. Read Matthew chapter 18. There are going to be so many things in your life that look like they're not going to work, but for God, and they do. That's why we walk by faith in obedience to the Scripture and not by what feels right or what seems right, because there's a way that seems right to a man, but those ways end in death, Solomon tells us. So let's be wise and let's follow God. Thank you so much for your time. May the Lord bless you, and celebrate. God has done great things in your life and great things for you. Celebrate those things like Deborah and Barak did. And happy Thanksgiving and Merry Christmas as we move into December now. And may the Lord bless you.